Welcome everyone to NBN's webinar today, which is on the COVID experience and what small business still needs. I'm Jennifer McEwen. I'm on the committee of NBN, and I also welcome Wendy Dawson, the president of NBN, as well as Anita Bartel, the executive officer, and they're both with us here today. So welcome, ladies. And before we get started, I'd like to officially recognise the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. And a bit of information about NBN for those of you who have not joined us before. We're a member-based organisation operating since 1994. We strive to facilitate connections, communications and collaboration with businesses that contribute to the economic development of the municipality of Melbourne, which is made up of 15 postcode areas. And just a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. We are recording the session today, so I ask that you please mute your mics and please do set aside some time for questions. And you can either pop them in the chat box as Craig speaks, or you can save them at the end. And we also encourage you to please post your LinkedIn URL in the chat box so you can connect easily with people here today. Today's webinar, in today's webinar, we will learn what has been done to support small business and what is still needed in the area of insurance, tax, PPSR, and unfair practices. To that effect, it gives me great pleasure to introduce our speaker, Dr. Craig Latham, who is the Deputy of Australian Small Business and Family Enterprise Ombudsman. Craig's experience stretches across business, government and academia in both Australia and New Zealand. He has specialist expertise in commercial and tax law, regulatory reform, private sector government collaboration. Craig has a passion to improve the commercial environment so that small and family businesses flourish, and has a particular focus on speedy and low-cost dispute resolution for business disputes. Craig, welcome, and thank you for joining us today.
And thanks so much. It's a pleasure to be here for the Melbourne Business Network, especially at this time as well. And I'm going to step us through a little bit of what's happened over the last year and a bit. As was mentioned, really happy if I can multitask and see a question as it arises. If you're quick on the fingers, I'll be very happy to answer it as we run, and would love to just have it as a little bit of dialogue here as much as we can in the e-world. But I'll start with just taking us a bit of a step back to maybe the start of 2019, somewhere around the start, and thinking about where we were at that point. Deep in drought is really the answer there. And I remember either at that time, it might have been a little bit earlier than that, visiting Tamworth, where I'd visited many times over the years, and looking out and thinking this is looking much more like desert than Tamworth, as I knew it. So we entered that 2019 in drought. Then the fires started coming on from about mid, and a lot of them, I think people have missed it or forgotten that we really started entering that fire system. I think it was about July-ish when the fires had begun to start. And certainly here in Canberra, we were in smoke, in like proper smoke from, where was it? It was early-ish December, and before then everything took off later. What we saw at the time, and this has continued since as well, is it's uncertainty and around evacuations as well. So the businesses, say on the south coast of New South Wales and Victoria, and the fires were more widespread than that, but seeing an influx of people for holidays at the busy time of the year, for businesses there, and then have evacuations shortly after Christmas as well. Then, of course, La Nina turned itself on, and we then had flooding. So, and what had been melted in the bushfires then could wash away as well. And so at that time, we started the year with, I think, some good hope, but having come through something fairly traumatic at the time. And this is not merely in talking about businesses, the businesses that were directly impacted actually lost stock or premises, but also those who were acutely labelled sort of indirectly impacted, that these are the people who, businesses where people just couldn't get to, or they lost electricity and telephone and all that sort of stuff as well. So a lot of uncertainty at that time of the year, and yeah, but with a hope through the future. And then what happened? We started hearing bits and bobs about COVID in January, February. So the little news reports, and I'm there, look, we've been through this sort of stuff before, you know, it's probably going to be overstated. But then by the tail end of February, we had the federal government coming out with its emergency response plan. The first economic stimulus package announced sort of early-ish March. Lockdowns then starting in mid to late March, and the international borders closing at about that same time. Back in the day, and it's useful, I looked these up this morning, what were the numbers looking like of cases. By the end of April, we'd had about 6,700 cases. And it's just, it reminded me how sort of you think, so like you think in the moment, but thinking back then and remembering back then what it felt like to be in that. Mid-May, there was some easing of the initial lockdowns, but then restrictions were reinstated in Victoria in June. Again, cases were still rising, but had slowed by that point. You got the local lockdowns in Melbourne in the end of June. Then you got the second Melbourne lockdown in early July. Cases at this time still rising. Victorian restrictions began to ease, though, in sort of mid-October. South Australia then picked up, and there were again more border closures and things. As we headed towards Christmas, the New South Wales Northern Beaches, and again coming at a critical time for small businesses in Sydney, but also along the coast, who would normally have great Christmases. Having said that, I did see on at least the South Coast a real pickup, but then Victorian restrictions came again, and there was an exodus, at least from the southern coast of New South Wales. So that's sort of, it feels like that. It feels like years compacted into that. And when the fires were happening, it seems like such a long time ago, although it comes back so quickly because areas are still ready to burn. And so I have seen fires since then as well, but La Nina's taking care of most of that for the moment. But now we're entering into a period where we'll be having the rollout of the vaccine, and hopefully a return to whatever the new normal is, better normality, a little bit more of a stilling of the waves when we have new cases emerge. So what inside all this, you've got small business. And so small business, there's a lot of them. So there's very many ways of counting them. If you're looking at up to, say, 20 employees, you're looking at 2.3 million small businesses. If you count small businesses by those businesses having under $10 million of turnover, you're looking at 99% of all businesses being small businesses. At that up to 20 employees, you're still looking at 97% of all business being small business. They provide about a third of Australia's GDP and employ almost 50%, 40-something percent of our workforce. Inside this environment as well, another figure is liquidations have been down. So the normal number of business insolvencies that we'd have been significantly down, and that's JobKeeper and the cash flow boost helping there. You need to also remember that we've got just shy of 700 liquidators. So an influx of liquidations as support comes off could do some interesting things with those people. They may become very busy. They may not be able to actually cope with the influx. Having said that, if you look back to the GFC, the insolvency liquidation type process has a long tail. So that the wash up of the GFC liquidations, which were about 150,000 small business losses of small businesses, took about 3 years. So what happens after here may not happen in a wave. It may happen a little bit slowly, but there will be a release of what people are referring to as the zombies, those that cannot survive without the support. So we've got that coming. So then, that's a bit of a lay of the land, where we've been, where we're at. But our office is sitting here as well. And it's been the busiest year that our office has had. We were set up by legislation in 2015. We've been running just shy of 5 years. This last year has by far been the busiest. We were set up under our own act, the Australian Small Business and Family Enterprise Ombudsman Act 2015, to do basically 2 things. And these have been added to a little bit over time, but it's to advocate for small business and to assist small business. So we do the one-to-many, the advocate. So we look to the system, how to best improve the system, what's getting in the way of small business, how can we help? The assistance side is the one-to-one support. So any small business can contact us and say, look, I've got a problem with X. It could be another small business, it could be a big business, anything, government. And then we will help that person, that business, resolve their dispute. Diving back to the advocacy side, we basically do our main game is around inquiries, so that we will pick off various issues that are really in need of review and recommendations as to how to fix things. So some of the things we've done over time, like recently, it's been our review of insurance, and I'll talk a little bit more about that as we go. But access to justice, as mentioned, the Personal Property Security Register, the PPSR. We've done insolvency review, COVID-19 plan. Now, I think all that is actually this last year, within the year. Supply chain financing may fall on the other side, but that does show you a little bit's happened in the last year. The R&D tax incentive we looked at as well. Again, that might be the last year, but for me now, time has become something other than what it used to be like. It's very fluid. We've looked at small business loans, affordable capital, payment times and practices. And I think way back when we started our first review was around the Road Safety Remuneration Tribunal, which feels like it was in a different phase of my career. It feels that long ago, given what's happened in the meantime. So there's the sorts of inquiries that we do. We also have, we submit to various government processes. So it could be other agencies looking at some issue. So, and it can be state, but generally it's federal. So it could be Attorney General, say, looking at some legal issue, and we'll input from the small business perspective. Now, to do that, we rely on input from small businesses and representative associations. And so, and I'll talk a little bit more about this, how we gather that up and how you can be part of that too. But we very quickly gather up, right, what are the views on whatever the issue of the day is, and then feed it in. Our inquiries are much more structured around this. So we go out systemically and so for a longer period to get the inside sort of grease on whatever the issue is. Having said that as well, how we choose inquiries, sometimes the Minister will instruct us to, and that was like the Road Safety Remuneration Tribunal, also our banking inquiry. When we get instructed, our Act has got some really great powers, and one of them is to be able to hold hearings and take evidence. And so we did that with the banking inquiry, and that was very effective. On a day-to-day basis, we can still demand document and explanation. So it's better than sort of the Freedom of Information Act sort of requirements. We can actually ask for not just documents, but if an explanation to an answer, or can you reduce this thing to writing? So like, pull out of your systems, whatever. We can ask for that sort of stuff. So we can get information and effectively evidence that is a little bit unusual, I think, across at least the federal public service. We meet and advise ministers. We will comment on legislation, a whole bunch of things around advocacy. On the assistance side, as I mentioned, it's one-to-one support. We get people to the right place to do to help resolve their dispute. A fantastic part of our legislation is it, and I think this should be used more widely across government. I'm not aware of it happening anywhere else. It says if there is somebody else more convenient or effective to deal with a dispute or issue, then we have to get it to them. So we are not to duplicate other people's operations. And so for some of our matters early on, I think we probably referred more, less so nowadays. I think people are working out exactly what needs to come to us. We'll get you to the right spot. So if you come to us, not a wrong door. If it's like a financial complaint, we might say, right, AFCA, the Australian Financial Complaints Authority, might be the right spot. If it is, it's going to be the most convenient and effective, because that they can actually do a determination. We offer alternative dispute resolution. So that's like, and it's quite broad, our definition of alternative dispute resolution. We have conferencing, mediation, conciliation, neutral evaluation, case appraisal. Specifically outside of that definition is arbitration, which has always been an issue that I've had my finger on, even in the days when our legislation was being drafted, saying that should actually be in, but there's constitutional limitations, federal constitutional limitations around the ability of the Commonwealth to require or to conduct arbitration. And I often argue, well, it's not about suggesting it or recommending it, but not doing it. And I haven't gotten that one across the line, but I haven't forgotten that argument. And you will see that arbitration has started to feature in a number of the industry codes. So it was in the Food and Grocery Code. It's also in the Dairy Code. And I think when we get to the franchising code rewrite, I will hope it's there. I think it will be there as well. And it's done in a way, as long as the code is a voluntary code, the legal boffins don't seem to have an issue with having arbitration in it, because people are signing up voluntarily to it. And you'll see the Dairy Code, it says you can sign up at the start, or you can choose to submit to it down the track. On our legislation, as whilst I'm there as well, our definition of small business is pretty big. I mentioned before the ABS definition, the Australian Bureau of Stats definition of up to 20 employees. Our definition goes up to 100 employees. So we really get bang into the middle of that medium SME territory as well. We've got, alongside that, there's an alternative one of up to 5 million turnover, but you don't need to worry about that, because the 100 employees go way past that. It'd have to be an unusual business. So some of the things, so we've got our general dispute resolution. I mentioned the industry code. So these are specific industry codes where we'll also administer the systems here. So dairy, franchising, horticulture, and oil. And we have lists of mediators and arbitrators and other people who can offer services under that. So our office doesn't conduct the mediation or whatever it is, but we get you to somebody who can conduct it for you. And the cost, as a rule, for say a day, in most of them, even the little disputes will probably take a day. It generally will be up to about $3,000, sometimes a bit cheaper, sometimes a little bit more, but it's that sort of figure. And that means that it is so cost effective compared to a legal dispute. So taking something to a court. So people often will ask me, so what size dispute should you go to court over? And answer is, it has to be multi-million. It has to be big. Because of the time it will take, the investment of your time it will take into it, the wrapping you up and the capital of the business up in this thing that could actually overwhelm you somewhere along the track, the ability to have to go to appeal as well. if we can help you resolve it through alternative dispute resolution, it's good for everyone, and it's very effective. So the sort of success rate around alternative dispute resolution sits around about the 80% mark. We do a lot of triage work before getting people to there, so they actually know what their dispute is, because some people will come to us with not quite certainty over what exactly it is they're arguing about. But we'll help work with both sides to say, right, these are the issues. Okay, so we've got 3 issues. And when the Ombudsman makes a recommendation to go to, say, mediation and conciliation, in our notice to do that, we'll actually specify, look, these are the issues as we've seen them, 1, 2, 3, and we'll have a 4th category normally, and anything else the parties think is going to be relevant. But part of our role is to help then the parties to focus down on what it is they're actually arguing about, get a little bit of empathy potentially going, because we'll say, right, they're saying this, what do you say? And then we'll tell the other side, well, they're saying that. So we get a little bit more clarity around what it is. Often it can resolve at that point. So for our office, it's more the harder stuff that you then end up having to send off to alternative dispute resolution. We also, as I mentioned, I think way back when we started, around the small business tax concierge. So once a small business has gone through the dispute resolution processes with the ATO or their internal staff, they get their notice of assessment, and there's a question, do I appeal to the AAT, the Administrative Appeals Tribunal, or not? Businesses can come to us and we'll get them for $100 co-payment. We'll get them to an experienced tax litigator who will help them step through their likelihood of success, what they need to do. We will have done, again, a bit of triage before that and helped them sort of pull together the relevant documents for basically a brief to get bang for buck with that advisor. And then should they go through and want to go to the AAT, we'll get them an extra hour free with that same person or somebody else if they want somebody else. Alongside that, we've also picked up this thing that's a little known thing. It's called the Scheme for Compensation for Detriment Caused by Defective Administration. So obviously bureaucrats name this. CDDA scheme, you may have heard of it. It's a discretionary scheme for federal government departments to make discretionary payments to businesses, other people who have been affected by the way that the law system has been administered. And so again, we will help small businesses around that. So that's us. So what are we seeing? And so the data always comes through a little bit with a bit of a lag. So I'll start off basically tail end of last year, the September 20 quarter, I think this is off. We're seeing that consumption spending had fallen by 56% since the start of 2020. And this is especially in accommodation and food services there. So significant drop. This goes to also that the hit from COVID is not felt evenly across all small businesses. So if you're in that accommodation food services sector, if you're in travel, international travel agents, if you're in conferences, you're going to be hit harder and longer. But that's one example. In that same, or the June quarter, 9.8% fall in hours worked. Small business revenue fell by 11%, but note also there that there was a support package running alongside, and that would have been zapped up into those revenue figures. And 1 in 5 small businesses, though, grew their revenues. So this is, again, the uneven impact of COVID, but 1 in 5 grew by 30% or more compared to the previous 12 months. So if you're in sanitizer, you probably grew more than 30%. So it has some businesses, that sort of 1 in 5, a small part, have actually done well during COVID. And again, city versus country. So if you're a hairdresser, say Sydney CBD or Melbourne CBD versus rural Victoria, rural New South Wales, you're going to have very different experiences. So the rural hairdresser is probably fine, right? The world is not currently on fire, but in CBDs, who's coming by? especially in lockdown. Then another couple of months on, so the next set of figures come from November of last year. And again, we won't know the true economic costs for some time, but we know many businesses won't survive. 40% of SMEs are reporting that they have no idea how they're going to fund their business once the stimulus measures end. Only about half, 47% of small businesses are expecting revenue growth in the next 6 months. Now, remember also the revenue growth will be off decreased revenue as well. So only 47% of small businesses are expecting the revenue growth in the next 6 months. 40% of businesses during COVID have pivoted, and 20% of those, so 1 in 5, are saying pivots is good and we want to keep it going forward. So we've actually come up with a better way of operating going forward, regardless of COVID. And almost 1 in 3 SMEs have indicated that without a significant improvement in trading conditions, they may sell or close their business. So a third saying we need to come out of this in a strong way for us to be around still into the future. Inside all this, so diving back to our office, one of our busyness for this last year was in very early stages here. So we're talking about February, March-ish. We started thinking, right, what's needed across the economy here? And this is on our website as well. So our website is ASBFEO, it's a great acronym, asbfeo.gov.au, and we'll publish almost everything we do. All right. So if there's not a reason to not publish, we are publishing. So and so our COVID-19 recovery plan is on there. And so this was hit the ground very early when people were struggling with what to do, and certainly what to do holistically. So we looked across the system, and at the same time, you'll have various people talking about various aspects of the system, but we tried to get a plan across the whole lot. And a bunch of this, and you'll see I'll touch on many aspects of this, have been picked up as part of other proposals. So we looked at things like taxation. So we said here, right, get rid of FBT for small business. And when a large business spends money in a small business, don't have FBT on that as well. FBT is what's called sort of a prophylactic for the system. It can stop bad behaviours, but doesn't generate a whole lot of revenue for government. And it's a real impediment for small businesses. When large businesses can bring things in-house, like in-house childcare or whatever, small business can't do that. So it's got a bit of a differential impact as well. We've also came up with other taxation ideas in a bunch of them, so recommend that report to you, that plan. But another one was reducing the small business return review period to 1 year after post lodgement. So when you lodge your return, ATO's got 1 year. If they want to do something to it, say if they want to say it's not right, we're going to audit you or whatever, they've got 1 year. We're doing and completing a further taxation review at the moment, and those ideas will feature in there, plus a whole bunch more as well, because since we've done the recovery plan, we've circled around, said, look, the tax system really does need some greater changes happening there as well. Another aspect that we looked at under that recovery plan was around access to justice. One of the ideas here is improving the unfair contract term coverage to make it illegal and to include large value contracts in that. Again, we did an access to justice report, which is another thing that's come out recently. That's part of that. That government is going to do that too. We're not sure exactly when. We're not sure Treasury knows exactly when the unfair contract terms legislation is going to come out. But it has been announced, the broad things that it's going to cover. So that we're looking forward to improvements there. And of course, insurance contracts come in, I think in April this year. We've been waiting for insurance contracts to come in to be covered by that unfair contract terms legislation. Better access to arbitration. That's another one of our key things. Again, trying to keep businesses out of the courts. Turnaround insolvency, again, the plan had things to say around this, and we did an insolvency report after this came out as well, around simplified liquidation. That was one of the key things. Also, a thing we're calling business viability review, and I'll step into that a little bit more as well as we go on. The simplified liquidation has been picked up, even if it's a temporary measure. Again, we're looking at things like small business can spot changes and change the way they operate going forward. We think if government comes up with a good idea here, we should keep it too. Government procurement's another one. We're still working in this area too, so expect more action here. But ideas here around, well, why doesn't the federal government have a small business panel? So we have panels for all sorts of things like defence or legal services. Why don't we create sort of a multi-use panel where small businesses just sit on that, and if it could be legal services, it could be something else, consultancies, other consultancy services, whatever it is, that easy access to this panel and get government to actually use it to benefit small business. Also talked about better visibility and governance down supply chains, and I know government's paying attention to that one too. So again, this is federal government's got a lot of procurement, but it has visibility of that first layer, so government agency to your head contract, but down the supply chain, you don't get to see what the payment terms are like, and that's a problem. If government's doing something, it should be the exemplar, and it should be making sure that all people who are contributing to the benefit of government actually getting paid on time. Look, that recovery plan, again, look at it. Industrial relations are in there, skilled workforce and measures to help improve that, and a bunch of other things inside that we will keep circling around to. And this is the benefit of our office, unlike something like, let's say, the Productivity Commission that will do a review of an area, a very in-depth review, and then step away from it to allow others to pick it up. We'll do our review. We'll come up with practical, achievable recommendations, but then we don't step away from it. So we have a long list of ideas that we've had accepted, and those that there's support, and those for which we haven't got traction yet. And we circle around on those and look for opportunities to keep going back to that well to bring in changes that will help the system. So some of the wins for small business over this time, the insolvency reforms are a big one. I've mentioned those unfair contract terms provisions that are going to be strengthened, that they're coming. Alongside that, the franchising reforms, the payment times reporting scheme, and I'll go into this in a little bit more detail as well, has been introduced, although we're yet to see widespread reporting under that, and the establishment of the Business Growth Fund. So around the insolvency reform, so these came into effect on 1 January 2021, and they provide temporary restructuring relief for small businesses. Small businesses have to apply by 31 March. So if this is you or somebody you're advising or somebody you know, you've got till 31 March 2021. What does it do? It allows incorporated small businesses with liabilities of less than $1 million to retain control of the business and property and affairs of the company while it develops a plan to restructure the company. And to do that, you get the assistance and pay for the assistance of a small business restructuring practitioner. And then once that's done, you enter into that restructuring plan with creditors, and creditors get to vote on it. What it does is that temporary restructuring relief stops creditors who are owed less than $20,000 from issuing a statutory demand to wind up the company. So it gets the smaller creditors off, and gives businesses 6 months then to respond to any statutory demand that they do receive. Basically, it creates a temporary safe harbour for personal liability for debts of the company for directors. Of course, that is companies. That's not small businesses run as partnerships or sole traders. And we're looking at how to reform, say, bankruptcy as well. And government is reviewing that at the moment and putting views into there to try to level that up between sort of companies needing restructuring and individuals, say, needing effective restructuring of their affairs as well. To get that insolvency reform for the company, you make a declaration about the company's eligibility via form on the ASIC website. You publish then the notice. There's a public notice that will go up, and you on your website, and provide a copy of that notice to ASIC as well. So there's a few steps there, and if I've got a very long website here, starting with asic.gov.au, but all the details are on there if that is something that you want to learn more about. Unfair contract terms, the idea here is that they're going to be made illegal. So currently they're only void or voidable. So if you were to take exception to a contract term, you take it to court, then the court could actually void the term, but what will happen under the reforms is they'll be made illegal, and the courts will have power to levy penalties for breaches. Definition of small business is going to expand to under $10 million turnover, or up to 100 employees. So again, that's a good move, and again, lifting of the contract threshold. So all that's going to be quite good. Again, awaiting the legislation there, also awaiting franchising. Alongside that unfair contract terms, we're also looking into what we're calling unfair business practices. So this could be, this is something that doesn't require a faulty term, but a method of operating that's unfair. So we see all sorts of things here. It might be not providing a channel to be able to raise a dispute. It could be what we call debanking. So we see a number of businesses being debanked. So this can be any of the banks saying, right, we don't want your business because, for example, you're in the adult services industry is one, or you're dealing in cryptocurrency, or you're a tattoo artist, or involved in a gun shop. So we've seen various things, and the banks are not all consistent around exactly who they debank. So if you're looking at adult services, some may want to, you may be fine if you're a brothel owner, they may want to bank you. But if you are an individual sex worker, they will not want to bank you. So it's all a bit odd what's happening in that territory. And again, it's something that we will be looking at as an potentially unfair business practice, because we characterize, for example, banking as an essential service, like, you know, water, electricity, gas. We're viewing that banking services to the modern business, like internet services, are an essential part of the way you conduct your business. The payment times reporting scheme commenced on 1 January 2021. But of course, there's going to be a lag here till businesses start reporting. It requires businesses with a turnover of more than 100 million, so we're talking big businesses here, to publish information about their payment policies. Big businesses use what's called the small business identification tool to identify the smaller end. So I think it's less than 10 million, I think is the definition there, that they use to say, we're going to report how you're paying, the terms and times that you're paying those businesses. There's still a lot to be working on. So I've mentioned unfair business practices, tax, we're still in that zone. We've recently come out with our insurance report, and again, I'll talk a little bit more about that. Personal Property Security Register, there's still more work to do in payment times. And we're also looking at things like user pay systems of that's used by the Commonwealth Government to recoup amounts. So this could be the water efficiency labelling scheme. It could be ASIC, sort of company charges and things like that. One thing that we keep touting, we haven't had success in landing yet, but it forms an important part of much of what we're saying, whether it's insolvency or tax or other, is the small business viability review. Now, this is the idea here is that federal government, we're saying, should pay, say, $3,000 for small businesses to be able to get tailored advice as to whether they're good, whether they need to pivot, or whether they need to close. And if that advice is you need to close, then an extra couple of grand to actually pay to get the advice on how am I wrapping it and get those services. That forms, for example, will form part of our tax review, because the ATO gets to see when businesses are struggling. As one of the, like the banks, the ATO are two of the people who first get to see businesses struggling. And so, and for the our insolvency work, again, this informs that. So it's one that's gotten, I think, good support across widespread support with accountants, the bookkeepers and others, but we haven't landed it yet. So watch this space. Payment times, I mentioned, still not going great, as you'd expect. Doubling, sometimes tripling, depending on your industry. We're seeing data around that. Another, I think, great idea, this one is starting to get traction. And again, small business viability runs with this as well, because it's the forerunner to this. It's how to improve access to finance. And it's revenue contingent small business loans. So especially as government pulls back the support it's giving for businesses, this is a HEC-style loan. So that you do, in our view, you do a small business viability review. If you get you're good to go or you need to pivot, then you'd be able to access what's effectively cash flow help, called this revenue contingent small business loan, HEX loan, where government funded, it could be privately funded as well, it could be joint, whatever, at a reasonable rate, but you only have to repay it when you hit sufficient revenue. It might be 80% of normal or whatever it is, whatever value you set. It's really, that one is critical for as we move out of where we are now into whatever normal is next. Around insurance, we saw widespread market failure in terms of availability and affordability. So denial of insurance can be, I will not provide you insurance, but it can also be, I'm going to charge you more than what it's worth. And we'd say that's still a market failure. I was seeing that particularly around things like public liability insurance. If you're adventure tourism, your ability to get public liability insurance is really narrow, and it's hitting a number of industries. The Personal Property Securities Register, again, our website has got our report there. Attorney General's has been looking at this area for quite a while around the Whittaker Review. So we took up that Whittaker Review happened about 4 or 5 years ago, I think. And we've picked up from that and said, look, there's some more change needing to happen here. When we look at this, it's very easy to get it wrong and hard to get it right. So that needs to be flipped. It needs to be easy to get it right, hard to get it wrong. Don't ask questions that are not needed and that are going to mean that you have an invalid registration. Also, Ombudsman's really keen on this, making small businesses aware that they can actually register as loans to the company, for example, where you leave monies in the company. So that's something that could actually be registered on the PPSR and give you standing with the banks if and when things go bad. Tax still to come. We're circling on that still. Fringe benefits tax, I mentioned that one. Interpretive consistency between agencies is a no-brainer. So if you're looking at something like research and development, you have differences in views between the ATO and the Department of Industry. So again, just getting everyone's story straight, or if you're looking at an employee contractor, Fair Work Ombudsman versus tax office, again, getting your story straight, using the same definition. Another one that we think just makes sense is suspending tax debt enforcement whilst you're appealing. So if you go to the AAT, you shouldn't have the debt enforced whilst you're trying to fight for it. Access to justice, again, our website has got our report there, but unfair business practices will be, again, another extension of our work into how small business accesses justice. the better access to arbitration is a key one here, but also looking at expanding and effectively harmonising the tribunals at the state level, so like increasing limits there and making them a bit similar, and then creating a small business claims list as part of the federal court where a matter doesn't fit, because it could be an international matter or interstate trade matter where it doesn't fit inside the tribunal structure. We're moving as part of our operations as well online, increasingly, we always have been online, but we're looking at offering to our list of mediators, and we'll land this shortly, a dispute platform that allows for online mediation, basically the lodgement of documents online and video conferencing in a more orderly sort of way. For businesses, of course, look, websites have never been more critical, and social media alongside it. When there's shutdowns, this is a way to still be reaching out. Buy from the Bush, just one of the programs that in just 4 months, there was 275 regional businesses as part of the Buy from the Bush campaign. Average revenue increase of 300%. And $5 million that was delivered in value to those businesses that they would not otherwise have seen. Our website is also, will direct you to My Business Health, which is about the health of business, but it also critically links to Beyond Blue's services here as well, aimed at small business people, because like small business people are the last to look after themselves. And this just helps with, again, it's helping the business, but it's helping you as well. We're very much online, social media sort of thing, around a product called MindHive. It's another Australian small businesses innovation that we use to talk to people like yourself, any small businesses, associations, anyone interested around issues. Now, currently we've got live where we're asking as we come out of COVID, what's next? What is the thing hitting you? And we're asking people for commentary around that. But there's normally always something on the boil on MindHive as well. So again, look at our website. You will be able to click through to MindHive and give us your views there. And the last thing before my voice actually gives up is we offer a small business hub. So if you're ever allowed out of Victoria and you make it to Canberra, we have an area here that you are free to come and use for free, which will have Wi-Fi, printing, a desk. And so that if you're meeting with people up on the hill here, Parliament House, or others in town for whatever reason, you can come and use our premises and stay connected. And that's where I will stop.
Thank you very much, Craig, for that very thorough and comprehensive outline of what your organisation does. I had no idea that there was that you did so much and that there was so much assistance available for small business. I just wanted to touch on the small business viability review. That seems to be a really excellent initiative. And even though you haven't got it on the ground yet, do you think it's probably likely that that's the next step after JobKeeper, when it's clear to government that when JobKeeper sort of falls away, they're going to have to deal with struggling businesses and whether businesses can stay viable?
So we saw it initially as sort of a standalone thing. So that we started thinking about this back in sort of March when there was a lot of uncertainty and there was a need to pivot. And so it was originally, as designed, it was about small businesses thinking differently and getting a little bit of help when they most needed it. Where I think it will land is if we get something like that revenue contingent loan happening, and that's looking like, if I'm reading tea leaves, it's looking good. It's got a lot of support for that. And again, it's a way of weaning people off support and making them accountable for it going forward, but in a way that will actually run with the business. Not looking at huge amounts for loan there as well. It's basically that the idea here would be around some of the cash flow type thing, noting that it's a HEX type scheme. To do that, you don't want to be giving revenue contingent loan to people who are going to go belly up. They need to, if they're going to go belly up, they need to close with sort of integrity and decency and everything else. That's the route they need. And that's where the review will also help, saying, I think it's time to call it quits, right? But if it says it's not time to call it quits, that's a good way of saying, well, okay, professional says this, or you do that, and you're good to go. Then that gives you a basis for actually making the loan as well.
Mm. Yeah. And also I wanted to ask you about the dispute resolution service that you offer. Is that limited to kinds of disputes, or is it wide-ranging?
Anything. Surprise me with what you can come up with. Because if it's not us, we will get you to the right spot. If there's no right spot, so we're the residual, right? So we will pick up anything that has not got a spot out there. And it's often the sorts of things that tend to be asked will be if it's an international matter. So it could be a complaint. Sometimes we get them from foreign businesses about Australian small businesses, but we'll still help. But it often goes the other way as well. That will tend to be asked if it's interstate trade, so businesses in different states. Tribunals tend not to pick it up, not always, but some of them do pick it up. But it's that sort of thing as well that we can pick up. But it's anything that doesn't have another convenient and effective home somewhere else.
It's interesting you get queries from businesses overseas. Is that largely around payment of invoices?
Yeah, it can be provision. It tends to be, we provided these goods and they haven't paid us. Can you rustle them up for us? So, yeah. And so our legislation's agnostic about your location. All it says is that you need a small business somewhere there. So a big business doesn't normally happen. Could come to us. So a big bank could come to us complaining about a business customer. That our legislation would say, come on, guys, I think you can handle this. Let's help you handle this. But it can happen anyway. And it can happen with government, small business, big business, small business, international, whatever other permutations you can come up with.
Yeah. Well, it's a lot of work. And can you tell me how many staff do you have doing all of this?
It's about 3. No, so not many more than that. So I think we're currently sitting at about 24. So not a lot, but we're very efficient in the way we operate. So yeah, we do a lot with what we have. Yeah. So.
Well, thank you so much, Craig, for your very informative session today. And given that we're running out of time, we might have to close it now, unfortunately. But I mean, we could go on because there's a lot of material that you have supplied and a lot of questions have come out of it. And all of you, if you have any questions that you'd like to pose, please do send them to us at MBN. And we will send them on to Craig, and I'm sure Craig will be happy to answer.
Happy, always here to help. And if you have disputes, feel free to come with disputes just straight to us, because that's our bread and butter. And join Mindhive and get on there and tell us your stuff. So what's irritating you at the moment? So.
Well, thank you very much. And Wendy, did you want to say anything to people today before we close?
Craig, thank you so much for all of that information. I must admit, I was having a hard time keeping up with you. I told you I tried to do my best to put the links in the chat box, but I think I got about 80% of those. I couldn't find the Mindhive, but I suppose we have to leave something to the attendees to follow up on. I guess I had one kind of cheeky last question in terms of what percentage of your clientele or the people that are using your services, what percentage is coming from Victoria at the moment versus the other states?
Yeah, so this is an interesting question. So Victoria is always about a third. So interestingly, Queensland is often our biggest referrals come from there, which it shouldn't be right. And especially from that southern tip. down the coast there on the coming into top of New South Wales is when we did a heat map. That's a hot area for us, that zone there. But basically, it tends to be, and it does vary a little bit over time, but Victoria, New South Wales, Queensland, about the third-ish, because you've got the other states. But the other states, not as much. And so Victoria is normally sitting about 28, something like that. So, and I don't think that's varied a lot. Some of the differences of these sort of issues we're dealing with of late tend to be the tax ones. So we've had a lot of tax issues, and again, a lot of Victorian ones, but I think it's pretty spread as well still.
Yeah.
Of course, Victoria's, on our figures, Victoria's doing it hardest as well at the moment.
Yeah, so. Yeah, and I think you know, one of the things that Sharon put in the chat box while you were talking is that, you know, and it's also Jennifer kind of doubled back on it as well, in terms of, I don't think people really understood the depth and breadth of the services that you offer, and it's really about knowing where to go for that help. Because it's you know, you made reference at the onset about zombie organizations, and sadly, you know, this past weekend has been tough for so many Victorian businesses. You know, it'll be tragic to see what unfolds over the next few weeks as things change, and hopefully there will be some further assistance on the horizon.
Yeah, it's very hard for businesses on Valentine's Day and Lunar New Year, when you're geared up to then turn around, lose that stock, turn around again. I don't know how they're doing it.
Yeah. So anyway, thank you so much for that. I'll do a bit of foreshadowing in terms of the Melbourne Business Network is developing a little bit of an ecosystem to help with providing some business recovery support. So watch that space. There'll be more coming to you shortly. Thank you again, Craig. Back to you, Jen.
All right, I'll wrap that up, and thank you everyone, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon.